CNN's debate night, the Democratic leadership debate. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Chris Cuomo.
And I'm Dana Bash. This is the final debate before Democrats choose who will lead their party in the era of Donald Trump. The vote will be this Saturday right here in Atlanta. These 8 contenders are vying to be the chair of the Democratic National Committee. They are here to discuss how they'll take on President Trump's agenda and how they hope to defeat his party in the midterm and presidential elections. With Republicans in control of the White House, Congress, and the majority of state houses across the country, this may be the most consequential DNC chair election in more than a decade. Please welcome President Obama's former Labor Secretary, Tom Perez. U.S. Congressman from Minnesota, Keith Ellison. Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg. The chair of South Carolina Democratic Party, Jamie Harrison. The executive director of the Idaho Democratic Party, Sally Boynton Brown. Former Rock the Vote president, Jammu Green. U.S. Air Force veteran Sam Ronan, and voting rights attorney Peter Pekarsky.
All right, candidates, a reminder of the ground rules. You're going to have 1 minute to answer questions that are posed to you, 30 seconds for any responses or rebuttals. You're going to see the timing lights on top of the cameras. They'll guide you. Dana and I will do that as well. We're going to moderate the debate. We'll be asking questions along with members of our audience who are going to get to vote for the chair of the DNC this weekend. So, with no further ado.
That's right, candidates. Let's get started. We're now in the second month of President Trump's presidency. This weekend, one of you will become the DNC chair and a leading voice of the opposition. Secretary Perez, I want to start with you. You've said that Democrats should hit President Trump between the eyes with a 2x4 and treat him like Mitch McConnell treated Barack Obama. But you've also said you'd be for Donald Trump if he ensures that everyone can have access to the American dream. So as DNC chair, would you work with President Trump or would you work to stop him?
Well, I think Donald Trump from day one has showed that he has a far-right agenda. He does not want to do what is necessary to move America forward. He wants to move America backward. We saw it 2 hours into his administration where he made it harder for first-time home buyers to buy a home by rescinding an Obama-era rule that would have made it easier for them to do that. 3 hours later, he files a motion in Texas to stay a proceeding on the case involving the voter ID law that I was involved in. So we have seen from the get-go that this person wants to turn the clock back, and the Democratic Party needs to take the fight to Donald Trump. When we lead with our values, when we lead with our conviction, that's how we succeed. And I've lost my voice going all over the country. And what I'm saying to people is, my voice may be crackly now, but when we take over by implementing this 50-state strategy and making sure that Democrats have a voice, that is how we return the power to the people.
Thank you. Congressman Ellison.
You know, Donald Trump has already brought the fight our way. I mean, I will add on that he has implemented and moved forward on the ban for people based on their religion. He has said he's going to build this wall. He has already made it clear where he is coming from. But I think that the DNC has a special role to play. Yes, the protests are awesome, and I support them, and I participated. But we can actually help Democrats win all over the country so that we can get rid of Donald Trump, so that we can block the action that are hurting Americans all the time. When Democrats lose elections, you know, bad things happen to good people. And we cannot stand back and tolerate it. And the tool that we have at our disposal is to win elections. And that means we go to 3,143 counties all over this country. That means we turn on during the off year. That means we focus on turnout. That is how we succeed.
Thank you. Mayor Buttigieg.
Yeah, there's no question that we've got to bring the fight to Donald Trump. Every falsehood has to be met with fact. Every outrage has to be met with a response. But it's also not all about Donald Trump. We got to get back to talking to people and about people in terms of their everyday lives, not the politics and the politicians, whether it's ours or theirs. We've got to make sure we're talking about our values. And every time he does something that offends our values, that insults our values, or that hurts real people, and he's doing it every day, then we've got to stand up to fight for people in terms of what it means for us in our actual lives. Donald Trump's gotten to be like a computer virus in the American political system. He ties up our minds and our processing power with these equations that don't even have any solutions until the system overheats and breaks down. Yes, we got to take the fight to him, but we can't let him dominate our imagination because it's our values and our candidates that matter most.
Thank you. Congressman Ellison, 3 of your colleagues in the House, Maxine Waters, Jamie Raskin, and Joaquin Castro, have publicly raised the specter of impeaching President Trump. Do you stand with them or with House Leader Nancy Pelosi, who believes impeachment talk is premature?
I think that Donald Trump has already done a number of things which legitimately raised the question of impeachment. I mean, on day one, he was in violation of the Emoluments Clause. This is a part of the Constitution that says, as the president, you can't get payments from a foreign power. The day people checked into his hotel and started paying him, who were foreign dignitaries, he was in violation of that law. There's already a lawsuit filed against him, and right now it's not about only Donald Trump. It is about the integrity of the presidency. So yeah, I think that we need to begin investigations to not go after Donald Trump, but to protect our Constitution and the presidency of the United States, to make sure that nobody can monetize the presidency and make profit off of it for their own gain.
Ms. Green?
Absolutely. When he commits an impeachable offense, the Democratic Party has to be that last line of defense for our Constitution and for this country. We don't have the luxury to take a back seat as this man is arrogantly marching us towards fascism. So I am on the side of holding him accountable, but I am also on the side of knowing in this unprecedented political reality we are living in, the Democratic Party has to innovate how we organize, how we communicate, and how we connect with voters so that the millions of Americans who are in the streets today resisting this president understand that we are a welcoming home for them. We will resist him in the House and in the Senate, and we will resist him in the streets, and the party will play that important role of protecting our Constitution.
Thank you. Mayor Buttigieg, you are an officer in the Navy Reserve and served in Afghanistan. At a previous forum, you called President Trump a draft-dodging chicken hawk and warned against sending Americans back into conflict. Is that the way Democrats running for office should talk about the commander-in-chief?
Look, we've got to face what we're faced with. This gets me emotional, because you got somebody who, as a millionaire's son, used his privilege in order to avoid serving. And look, military service isn't for everybody, but for somebody who did that, to then see fit to turn around and attack the people who did serve, and even attack them over their service, that is unconscionable. You know, the fact I was never rich, but I felt privileged with a Harvard degree. That was one of the reasons I felt I needed to go into the military. He used his privilege to stay out. But again, you know, I got to say, I even find myself feeling the need to do things like call him something really tough, because he's bringing out the worst in us, all of us, his supporters and his opponents. We need leaders who will bring out the best in us. That's what leadership is all about, and that's what the Democratic Party needs to lead for.
Mr. Ronan, you served in the Air Force. What's your response to that?
Absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump, he is a draft dodger. He's trying to send us into more frivolous wars. He's trying to increase our foothold and our footprint in the Middle East, and that's absolutely not going to win anything. It's only going to send our boys and girls to their deaths. But it's not enough to just simply condemn Donald Trump. I mean, look at his administration. Look at all the Democrats who have supported him. Look at everything that has happened to empower this man to get to where he is. And as Pete just said, my service, that means something to me. When I raised my right hand, that was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I think me and Mr. Branham as well, I mean, we all served. We know what that's like. And to have someone to just flagrantly attack our service, the Yellow Ribbon and the Gold Star Army, Gold Star families as well, it's reprehensible. We must hold them to task. And that's exactly what I would do as DNC chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Roman. Chairman Harrison, let's bring you in on this. Like Mr. Ronan said, it's easy to be negative about the president if you're a Democrat right now, but is that enough? During the 2016 election, there was criticism that the Democrats didn't have a positive enough message. Is going negative going to get you where you want to be?
Well, it's two things. You know, I served in the House of Representatives as the executive director of the House Democrats when Democrats took back the House in 2006. And Nancy Pelosi, who then became the Speaker, said that you have to do two things in order to get back to the majority. You got to take them down. You have to paint the picture so the American people can see it. And then you have to demonstrate what it is that we are for. And that's really, really important. We're in unprecedented times right now. For the first time in history, we've had a vice president that had to cast a tie vote in order to get a nominee into a secretary position. Unprecedented to have a president that go after the judiciary and also to go after the media with such vitriol. Unprecedented in terms of having someone who is an anti-Semitic in the White House. Unprecedented having somebody like Jeff Sessions at the Judiciary Department. And so, yes, we have to paint that picture, but at the same time, we have to do something that I say, which is show and not tell. We have to show the American people what we are all about. And that is not just through words and flowery words, but it's through our actions. And that's what we're doing every day in South Carolina. We're going into communities, actually addressing the issues that they're dealing with. And that's really important for us to do as a party.
Chairman Harrison, thank you. Mr. Pekarsky, you know how to make a case. What is the case for the Democrats right now?
The case for the Democrats right now is to re-energize the entire Democratic Party from the ground level up, and to make the case that Donald Trump is unsuited for the office, that he has done a number of things which are illegal and which we are not about to stand for, that he has violated a number of rights and shows every inclination, it seems, to keep on violating them. I mean, the party, it's not just an issue of taking on Donald Trump. The party has got to do, there are a lot of reforms in which the party has to engage to enable it to take on Donald Trump and the entire Republican Party and the entire Republican cast of characters in the House and the Senate. So it's not just a matter of taking on Donald Trump. It's a matter of re-energizing the Democratic Party from the ground up in all 185,000 precincts in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Pekarsky. Appreciate it. Congressman Ellison, on Tuesday, you criticized President Trump on Twitter for not speaking out sooner about anti-Semitism. You have critics in your party that say that is the right message, but you may not be the right messenger because you're dogged by your own questions about potential anti-Semitism. What do you say to your critics?
Well, these are false allegations, and that's why I have 300 rabbis and Jewish community leaders who've signed a letter supporting me. 5 of my colleagues, they said, look, I don't have anything to say about this race, but we know Keith, and he's a good man and always has been. That's why, you know, a week ago, I was in New York City with HIAS, which is an organization, a Jewish organization, which stands up for refugees. They're saying we were once refugees, and they stood out in New York and demanded that we have respect for refugees now. And when I spoke at that, I invoked the memory of the St. Louis, where Jews fleeing the Third Reich were turned away in Cuba with the knowledge of our government and sent back. Many of them ended up perishing in the Holocaust. I have a long, strong history of interfaith dialogue, interfaith communication, and that's why in my own community, I have strong support from the Jewish community. So these are smears, and we're fighting back every day. But we're fighting back with people who know us. But I just want to say it is critical that we speak up against this anti-Semitism, because right now you have Jewish cemeteries being defaced and desecrated. Right now you have Jewish institutions getting bomb threats. We have to stand with the Jewish community right here, right now, foursquare, and that's what the Democratic Party is all about.
And if you are the chair of the party, President Trump has made the relationship with Israel central to his understanding of that region of the world.
Right.
That criticism from your critics will come in that Keith Ellison, who's the head of the DNC, if you get this job, he was someone who said that Israel could not be the only lens, that all foreign policy was seen through the lens of 7 million people. You said it in 2010. What do you say to your critics who said that that's not who should be the head of the DNC?
Well, here's what I say. I voted for $27 billion in bilateral aid to Israel over the course of about 6 or 7 votes. I have been to the region many times and sat down with members of the Knesset and worked with them. I've been a stalwart champion of the two-state solution, which means that we have got to have Israel and a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security. And I have made that a very key cornerstone of my advocacy. And so, look, I believe that the U.S.-Israel relationship is special and important. I've stood for that principle my whole service and my whole career. And you can trust, when I'm the DNC chair, that that relationship will continue. We will maintain the bipartisan consensus of U.S. support for Israel if I'm the DNC chair.
Congressman Ellison, thank you for addressing the criticisms. I want to bring in John Verdeo. He is a DNC member from North Carolina. He is supporting Congressman Ellison. You have a question, and we're going to direct it to Ms. Boynton-Brown. Please go ahead.
Good evening. My question to you is, how do you plan to build a bridge between those Democrats who voted for Trump versus those who stay loyal to the party and are now affected by Trump and his executive orders? More bluntly, how do you get a Latino voting Democrat whose family is now facing deportation in the same room with a Democrat who voted for Trump?
So I think it's really important that the Democratic Party focuses on an overarching message that's going to speak to all Americans. We have been for far too long communicating to specific communities specific messages. And what we're missing is a values-based message that says who we are as Democrats and what great work we're doing in the country. We've got to develop that message and deliver it to everybody. And then we have to start coming together and listening to each other. We've got to teach each other the empathy skills to be able to sit in conversations and really ask each other why we're doing what we're doing, and then figure out what we agree on so that we can move forward and make America the country we all want it to be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's not hypothetical. You know, a lot of times we hear analysts saying, how do you get those people in the same room? That's something that happens every day in my community. In a place like South Bend, a diverse community, those folks are already in the same room. And what we've got to do as a party is recognize that that same struggle for belonging is true whether you're an immigrant mom trying to make sure you won't be divided from your family, or a blue-collar auto worker trying to figure out where your job's going to be, or a transgender kid in a high school who just needs to go to the bathroom like everybody else. We're all in this together. That's got to be our message.
Well, thank you. Ms. Green, I want to move on to what's happening across the country right now, which is Republican lawmakers are facing protests at their town halls in their home districts. Back in 2010, Republicans were able to use similar energy from the Tea Party to take control of Congress. So how can Democrats harness this energy and to shift the power in Washington?
This energy is happening because the voters and the people marching on the street understand that we are facing the single biggest threat to our freedoms since we won them in the American Revolutionary War. And the Democratic Party has a real unique opportunity, a transformative opportunity to open up our doors to people who, in many ways, have decided to start organizations, to take daily actions without working with the party. Yesterday was Barbara Jordan's birthday. And Barbara Jordan in 1976 stood up at the Democratic National Convention and said that when people in this country, in our history, have looked for an institution to uphold our values, it has always been the Democratic Party. And I'm afraid right now that is not happening. And it's not happening because we need to do a better job of really looking at how we walk the talk of our values. And it would be very easy in this race to tell the voters exactly what they want to hear. I've chosen the road less traveled, speaking uncomfortable truths about how we can do business as Democrats in better ways to open up our doors. And that includes caucuses, which are unintentionally disenfranchising to parents with children and shift workers and the elderly and disabled. And if we reimagine how we do business as Democrats, the millions of Americans marching in the street will see that we're welcoming home to them and the resistance.
Thank you. Mr. Roder, I want to pick up with you on a question, another dynamic that's going on inside the Democratic Party right now. Last week, a new progressive PAC called We Will Replace You vowed to pressure Democrats to oppose President Trump across the board or face primary challenges. You come from Ohio. Is absolute obstruction the right strategy for a Democrat running in a purple state like yours?
No, it's not. And that question actually ties into Sally's question and what Jamut just talked about. You can't just simply tear everything down. Because in a duopoly, if one side falls and you just completely obstruct it, that power void will only be filled by what's left over. And to your point with the caucuses, it isn't enough. It isn't enough to just offer minorities and those who maybe not have as strong a voice, give them their own little seat at the table to deliberate among themselves what they want to have heard, and then bring it to the executives to maybe decide whether or not they want it. If you want true equality and true equity in our party and in the future of leadership and the diplomatic process, or the democratic process, I apologize, you must actually give them a seat at the table. The problem with disenfranchisement in our country is not that we aren't empowered, it's not that we aren't energized or willing to get out there and fight. Clearly all these town halls, clearly all of these different movements, DAPL, SABLE, the Women's March, Black Lives Matter, and everything else in between, they want to fight, they want to give up. So what we must do as a party is actually embrace leadership and remove our thumb and our heel from them, and they will flourish without any additional push.
You know, Secretary Perez, I want to stay on this theme and ask you about something specific. About the fact that Democrats, as you well know, are facing an uphill battle to win the Senate back in next year's midterm elections. 10 Senate Democrats are running for re-election in red states, that Donald Trump won. One of them is Claire McCaskill. She voted to confirm a handful of President Trump's nominees, and she says she's worried that she might have a primary challenge because critics, in her words, don't think she's pure. Is this notion of a purity test healthy for the Democratic Party?
Well, I was in St. Louis last night, and I'll tell you, Claire McCaskill has an immense amount of support there. And the way we're going to take back the Senate, the way we're going to take back the House, the way we're going to take back state houses is to get back to basics. That's what we need to do as a party. We have to make house calls. We have to have a 12-month-a-year organizing presence. I was in rural Wisconsin on my rural tour, and I met a guy in northwest Wisconsin who said, I feel politically homeless because the Democratic Party had abandoned rural Wisconsin. And when we are organizing, when we're talking to people, you can't show up at a church every 4th October and call it an organizing strategy. That's how we take back the Senate. That's how we take back the House. That's how we take back state houses. And that is why when we lead with our message of economic opportunity, that's how we win.
But Mr. Secretary, just to follow up, the question was about a primary challenge. If you're the DNC chair and there are challenges from the left to incumbent Democrats, will you support that? Will you cheer them on, or do you think that's a mistake?
I think the role of the DNC chair is to let the process run its course. And then we move forward, you know, when the general election moves ahead. And I'm confident that this year, I mean, you look across this country right now, in Virginia, at the State House of Delegates level, they have more candidates than ever before. This energy is electric. January 20th was undeniably an important day, but January 20th and 21st and beyond was even more important because people are rising up and saying, Donald Trump, you do not stand for our values. And they're running for office.
Thank you.
They're making
Congressman Ellison, what about this idea of a purity test? We've seen it in recent elections on the Republican side, not so much on the Democratic side.
Well, I'll say that I agree with Tom that the role of the DNC is to be neutral and fair to all primary contestants. I will make a personal call and say, let's not kill each other off, guys, you know, but I will not publicly shame any Democrat in a primary. It's going to be neutral and fair if I'm the chair. But let me just say this. Donald Trump, as deceptive as he was, did say he was for jobs, trade, infrastructure, and protecting Social Security. That's our message. That's what we do. That's why he beat all those other Republicans, because he stole a Democratic message. We do have to lead with our values. I encourage Democrats in all offices to say, stand for Social Security, stand for fair trade, stand for good jobs, stand for infrastructure investment, and don't back off of it. We should not, in this moment, think that moving away from what people are crying for is the right thing to do. We need to go to what people need. People
Thank you, Congressman.
Yeah.
Mr. Harrison.
Let me get to the crux of this. So, two sobering statistics. 25, as you said, we have 25 U.S. Senate seats up. Republicans need 7 seats in the United States Senate in order to get to 60, meaning that they can pass any legislation through the U.S. Senate. In addition, they only need 1 more state in order to call a constitutional convention. So if Democrats want to be in a permanent minority, let's spend all of our time and energy fighting each other. But if we want to actually fight back against Donald Trump, let's spend our energy going after Ted Cruz. Let's spend our energy going after the Republicans that are up. We don't have the time, the energy, and all of the people that we are fighting for each and every day don't have the time for these purity tests. We have to fight back against the Republicans. We can't fight each other.
Thank you for your answer. Appreciate it. Mr. Pekarsky.
Can I take a crack at this?
Well, I have a question for you specifically. I think you're going to want to answer.
Okay.
President Trump asserts that more than 3 million people voted illegally in 2016. He has offered no valid proof of this assertion, and yet the perception has caught fire. You have expressed concern about this perception and that it will lead to a chilling effect and potentially more voter suppression, maybe more voter ID laws. If that is true, what would be wrong with that?
What would be wrong with more voter ID laws? Is that the question?
It is your choice to answer a question with a question. Yes.
What would be wrong with more voter ID laws is that the ones that exist are, in general, a violation of the U.S. Constitution. The Republican Party, by and large, has chosen to disenfranchise people in this country because of the color of their skin. That simply is not allowed by our Constitution. The courts have found that. So that's what would be wrong with more voter ID laws. As far as Mr. Trump, if he has proof of a crime, he ought to offer it. You ought to get sworn in and say, okay, here are the names of the 3 million people that I know about personally who voted. But he hasn't offered to do that, probably because those people don't exist.
Chris,
in terms of harnessing the energy here, I agree with Tom and Keith and Jamie, and I think there may have been a couple others who expressed themselves. The way to harness that energy is locally, on a 185,000 precinct basis, to locally go to the local people in the precincts and decide what issues are important to them locally and organize around those issues. And those issues they are democratic issues. They are equal pay. They're fair trade, infrastructure, protecting Social Security and Medicare. But that's got to be done locally. And if it's done locally, that will harness the energy that we've seen.
You're over time, Mr. Pekarsky.
Sorry about that.
I appreciate it. No, I appreciate it. Yes, but the context for this, again, was I understand why the room applauds a room of Democrats when you say voter ID laws are against the Constitution. But make the case to people who don't understand why offering an identification would be so onerous for people when they go to vote.
Well, I spent a substantial portion of my life doing these cases at the Department of Justice. Let me give you some facts and figures. We sued Texas and we won. And we won because over a 10-year period, 46 million votes were cast. Zero, count them, zero reported incidents of illegal non-citizen voting. 2 incidents of in-person voter fraud. 46 million votes cast. If we weren't on television, I would call this a word that begins with a B. I will anyway. It's bunk. And you know what? It's bunk and every other case. And if you're in Texas, you got to drive 120 miles to get an ID. If you're poor, that is a poll tax. That's what that's about, Chris. That's right. And the important thing to know about this rule, and even though my voice is a little crackly, I'm always going to be a voice for people who are disenfranchised in voter ID laws, because this is part of the Republican playbook, and they're doing it because it works. And that's why we need to make sure we are fighting this tooth and nail.
Jamal Green, let me get you in on this.
So this is one of the uncomfortable truths that we have to face as a party, because your question about Americans who think it's okay to show an ID to vote because they show an ID for many daily transactions. The majority of Democrats think that voter IDs is okay. This is why the Democratic Party has to shift the battlefield from voter suppression to voter expansion. We have to embrace universal voter registration. The bottom line is voter registration in and of itself is a barrier.
Ms. Green?
We have to take the lead with online voting. We have to beat them at their own game. If we only focus on voter suppression, and the work that's happening in the courts is critical,
Okay.
but what we can do as a party is to shift the battlefield to make sure that we are increasing
Ms.
turnout.
Green, thank you. Congressman, I got a choice for you. You want 30 seconds to respond, or you want a minute for a new question?
I got to deal with this issue on
Done. Go ahead.
front. You know, in Minnesota, in 2012, Republicans put on the ballot a photo ID law. And in the very beginning, people said, you know, too many people think it's good, we can't beat it. But you know what? I devoted my entire campaign to defeating it. And we got the vote out. We knocked every single door we could get. And we literally educated people on why photo ID was expensive, was excluding people, was unfair to veterans, people of color, low-income people, seniors. And at the ballot box, which is what the DNC specializes in, we defeated photo ID in 2012. It can be beat at the ballot box. It must be beat there. And the DNC chair we will employ lawyers, but what we really do is we win elections.
Right.
We won that election, and I'm proud that we did.
Let me give you 30 seconds for a question on sanctuary states.
Right.
California, you know what they're doing there. They're trying to pass a law that keeps state and local law enforcement from helping federal authorities enforce immigration laws. Do you think that is the right thing to do?
I think that it is right and proper for states and local communities to devote their precious resources to protecting their people. And I don't like the federal government saying we're going to punish you and deprive resources of you because you will not allow the federal government to basically nationalize your local police department and your state police department. This is wrong and it's unfair. And let me tell you, many police officers around this country will tell you that a lot of folks who are victims of domestic violence will be reluctant to call because they fear that they will be deported. And this is a very bad policy. I stand by California and all these other cities.
Congressman, thank you. Ms. Boynton-Brown, you understand the situation out west. What's your follow on the counter argument, which is you're a law enforcement officer. You are there to enforce the law. If somebody enters the country illegally, they have broken the law. You're supposed to help the Immigration Service.
Listen, state control is really, really important. We have to have local control, and I think these states have the right to pass their own laws and have the citizens in their state follow those laws. Yes, there is a place for the federal government. However, the Republican Party has been saying forever that the federal government has too much power, right? This is one area that I agree with the Republicans. The federal government has too much power. We need to make sure that all of our states have the ability to come back and follow their local laws and pass those local laws. And there's way too many instances of that just not happening. Education is another great example where we need to empower our states. And I'll tell you that this is really important for the DNC race because we're having that exact same conversation around the state parties. You know, as DNC chair, yes, it's a federal position, but they have been entirely too focused on the president position.
Okay.
We need to make sure that we come back.
Chairman, the Democratic position should be that states should not work with ICE. Is that what you stand for?
Secretary?
Chairman, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary.
We can all answer. You said chairman.
Wow, that's right, that was good. That was a test. You all passed. That was good. Anybody who didn't answer to chair, you got to think about why you're up there tonight. So, Mr. Secretary, the idea that the Democrats say every state should take care of itself, don't work with ICE if it doesn't work for you. Would you want that to be the Democratic message?
I sued a guy named Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County. And here's what he was doing. And this isn't my words. These are the words of his own police officers. He built a wall of distrust between the police and the community. The most important currency that a police officer has is her trust from the community. When you allow this to happen, you undermine trust. And then a person who's a victim of sexual assault doesn't report it. The person who's a victim of human trafficking doesn't report it. That is why this is bad public policy.
Chairman,
when you're trying to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Chairman Harrison, I was going to you. What do you have to say about this?
Oh, I totally agree with the Secretary on that. It's about trust and protecting the vulnerable in these communities. They need to be able to feel like they can call their police and not be in danger of being separated from their children. You know, the Republicans talk all the time about being the party of family values, but right now they are ripping children away from their parents. Right now, there are young kids in this country, right after Donald Trump was elected president, that could not sleep at night, that would wet the bed, that in this country because of the fear that all of his rhetoric placed in them. We have to do better in this country. We are the land of the free. And, you know, you look at the basement of the Statue of Liberty. Bring me your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. That's what we are. We are a nation of immigrants. We're not these fear mongers, and we have to stop it.
Look,
Chairman Harrison, thank you.
We have to do better as Democrats with effective messaging. And I'm sorry, your question was wrong, because when you entered this country illegally, it's a civil offense. It is not a criminal offense. And no human being can be illegal. And so we, as candidates for this position, need to understand we can't be just reactive from our messaging. We have to be proactive. And that is something we have failed to do, and we need to do it better. So whether it's connecting with voters heart first, whether it's using new tools from a communication standpoint, and whether it is clarifying and holding the media accountable when they get the story wrong about Democrats and about the American people, we need to be the ones to speak up.
Jamil Green gets the last word right now. Let's go to break. We have a lot more to talk about. Thank you for joining us for the Democratic Leadership Debate. Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the CNN debate. Who will be the DNC chair? All the candidates are here. Next question, Secretary Perez. Recently you said that the primary was rigged against Bernie Sanders. Later the same day you said you misspoke when you made those comments. Which is it?
Well, you know, here are the facts. Hillary Clinton won the Democratic primary. Hillary Clinton also won the popular vote. At the same time, because of the absence of transparency in the Democratic primary, there was a crisis of trust that ensued. And what we need in the chair of the Democratic Party is to make sure that in fact and in perception, every single day, you are fair and neutral. That's why when you asked the question before about primaries, you have to let the primary process go. If I were the chair, if I have the privilege of winning, for instance, one of the things I would recommend would be that we set the primary debate schedule long in advance of when we know who the candidates are. We have to do everything to make sure we are fair and transparent. And it's not only in how we set the primary process. The DNC is a black hole. And we have a crisis of confidence because it is. And that's why the leader of the DNC needs to make sure that we are investing in
hold on a second, Secretary, 10 seconds. Was it rigged or not?
Again, the process, because of the absence of transparency, it created that crisis of relevance, and it created the distrust that people didn't trust the outcome.
Mr. Ronan, was it rigged or not?
Thank you. I was going to interrupt anyway. The point is, not only was the primary rigged, it was also rigged all across the country because the DNC has never allowed outsiders or brand new people to rise through the ranks. It has always been an insider game, and it has been that way for a very, very long time. That is where that lack of trust has come into play, because not only was Bernie Sanders snubbed, not only did it look like Hillary Clinton had bought or muscled her way into it, then those supporters were denied a chance to speak at the convention, and that was the final straw. If people don't have a voice, an equitable voice, like I alluded to earlier, then people are not going to trust the system, and they are going to go out of their way to break it.
Secretary Perez, is Mr. Ronan wrong?
Well, again, you know, we need every single day, as the leader of the Labor Department, the leader of the Civil Rights Division, and I hope to be the leader of the Democratic Party, we have to do everything in a transparent fashion. And when you do that, you earn trust. Trust isn't something you're given.
I would
it's
like to
something
say
you earn.
I think that's a long way of saying
Party.
Why, Mr. Mayor, why?
This is why I got motivated to get into this. We can't allow this to devolve into factional struggle. Of course there were problems with 2016. Nobody could say that there weren't. But I didn't love living through the 2016 primary the first time. I don't know why we as a party would want to live through it a second time. We have got to look forward, not back. The wolf isn't just at the gates. The wolf is through the gates and eating our sheep right now. And this idea that this is going to be a factional struggle between the Bernie wing and the establishment wing is missing the point. We've got to take it to the real opposition, which is the Republicans, who are in power from the top of the ticket all the way down to school boards.
Ms. Boynton-Brown?
The reality is that the world has moved to a place where the Democratic Party is no longer keeping up with it. There are more independents than there are registered party people, and those independents want a place to play in the primary system. And so you have a system that's been in place, as Sam said, that's no longer serving the people in our country. I talk a lot about new power. If you haven't heard me, you can go to thisisnewpower.com. And this is what the people in our country are demanding our systems go towards. Something that's collaborative, something that's truly inclusive, and something that's transparent. And it's an issue that has to be dealt with. We cannot just throw it under the rug and say we've got to move forward in the future.
Ms.
We've got to
Boynton-Brown,
fix
thank you.
this.
Hold on a second. Congressman Ellison, picking up on Ms. Boynton-Brown's point, it must not be swept under the rug. It must be dealt with. How? Do you issue an apology to Bernie Sanders? Do you own what happened? How do you move forward if you don't own the past?
Well, Donna Brazile went to the Bernie supporters, and she did issue an apology. That happened. Now we have a unity commission, which is going to be appointed by somebody in this group. And I think we absolutely have to make sure that in the future, every person who wants to vote for a Democrat must feel that it was fair, open, and accessible and transparent. That is a mission, but I'm telling you, the real problem is ahead of us. People are organizing in the street right now. I believe I'm the unity candidate in this race because I supported both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And I believe I can pull the people together so that we can come together as a party and we can win elections so that we don't ever have to go through this thing anymore. Donald Trump is wreaking havoc on the American people, and the Democratic Party has to be the agent of the American people, not an agent unto itself. And so I believe we have to move this thing forward and not engage in the ruinous who shot John. We got to come together, people, and fight the real enemy. That's the real deal.
Chairman, quickly.
I agree with Keith, but one of the first lessons you learn in politics is perception becomes reality, right? And for a number of folks, they do believe, they use the terminology rigged. Now, one of the things, I'm a lawyer, what is the definition of rigged? Are we saying that voting machines were rigged for Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders? Sam, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely not. What I'm saying is the system in of itself is exclusive to just the people in charge.
No,
That's the problem.
But when we say an election, when we say an election is rigged, in the minds of folks, people are stealing somebody's vote and giving it to somebody else. Language is very, very important in this. Part of the problem that we had as an early primary state is that a lot of people didn't understand what this primary system was like. They didn't understand what the role of quote-unquote superdelegates or unpledged delegates, they didn't understand the role that they played in this primary system. So the first job that we have to do as a party is make sure we're transparent enough that we educate people about the process so that they know the difference between a caucus and a primary.
Mr. Ronan, respond.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Jamie, for the passion, because you bring up a very valid point. It's the superdelegate system. It's the closed primaries. It's people not knowing how the system works. Go to Democrats.org and try and find out who the chairmen are. Find out who your county chairs are. The system in of itself is not transparent. I've been saying that since day one. We need to get rid of superdelegates. We need to get rid of money. We need to get rid of the upper crust influence. We also need to stop playing these same tired games. Just in Florida, there was that perception, as you said, that the Florida chairman somehow managed to play a game. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. It's that perception. So yes, we must needs come together and fix that.
All right, well, hold on a second. Hold on, Jim Green. I want to bring you in on this issue of superdelegates. Do you think their time has passed? Is there a better way? And if so, what?
First, every Democrat and most Americans, because we did win the popular vote, know which election was rigged. Period. Amen. To the superdelegate issue, we do have this transformative moment.
What does that mean? What does that mean that the election was rigged? Are you saying that the president did not win the election?
If there was one vote that was influenced by Russian meddling, that was cheerleaded on by this man in the White House, then that election was influenced by a foreign government and cheerleaded on by the man who is in the White House right now. But to the point of superdelegates and to this issue, the next chair of the DNC has to acknowledge the wounds that the Bernie Sanders supporters have coming out of 2016. And you have to also acknowledge that there are real wounds for Hillary Clinton supporters who feel there was no attention to the sexism and misogyny that she faced.
Amen.
But the real answer, Chris, is specific prescriptions to get there. And tackling superdelegates is one of those answers. I'm the only candidate who has said, I will go to the Unity Commission and ask them to retire this tainted concept. And it was tainted before 2016. And our problems that we're talking about cannot be solely focused in a 2016
All right,
lens.
Ms. Green, thanks.
So it's superdelegates, it's
goes further
caucuses,
than that,
it's
though.
transforming how we meet, and it's transforming our
You're over time.
accountability.
Ms.
That's
Green,
what we
thank you.
can do.
Thank you. I want to turn to a different question in the same vein about the future versus the past. And I'll give this to you, Ms. Boynton-Brown. As you all mentioned in several different occasions, Hillary Clinton did get about 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. With that base of support, would it be a good idea and a good thing for the Democratic Party if, say, Hillary Clinton would want to run again?
I think the important thing that we remember as the Democratic Party is that we're here for small d democracy. If Hillary Clinton wants to put her name on the ballot again, that's her decision. That's not our decision. Our job is to make sure that we run a fair democratic process where anybody can put their name on the ballot. And we support anybody who's on the ballot with the same services, the same resources, and we don't give anybody preferential treatment because they've done it before or they've been here for a long time.
I take your point that obviously you can't tell people whether to run, but as a party, and if you were the chair of the Democratic Party, do you honestly think it would be good or bad to go back to the candidate?
I think you're not understanding my point. My point is, as a leader of our party, it's not my job to say my opinion on that. It is the American people's job in a primary. That's what it's designed to do.
And I want to ask you about the question about not just Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders. Are you on the same page?
Me?
I'll go to you, Chairman Harrison. You can answer it as well, Mr.
It's
Progressive.
been so long, I'll be happy to answer.
Go for it.
Anybody who wants to run should run. And it is the role of the chair, as I put on my website, Peter4DNC.com, the first time it went up, that it is the role of the party chair, per the charter, to be impartial and even-handed with respect to all the candidates and all the campaigns. That's the role of the party chair. That's what these people are saying. And I made it quite clear at some of the future forums which were held earlier in a number of cities, that if I am chair, I'm going to be impartial. All the people who work for the DNC are going to be impartial, or they're not going to be working for the DNC, and I will arrange that as CEO. And all the officers, per the charter, are supposed to be impartial. The officers don't work for me. The officers work for the Democratic National Committee. And if it looks like any of the officers are not impartial or even-handed, I told the members of the Democratic National Committee and the others at those meetings that I will take those officers to the Democratic National Committee for such action as the committee wants to take, which includes voting them off the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison.
This is an example of us
Let
asking
Mr. Harrison in, please, one at a time.
In
Go ahead.
short, whomever wants to run should run, and there are qualifications for running for the Democratic nomination. And I believe, and I'm explicit in this, I believe it's up to the Democrats in this nation to make a determination of who their nominee is. And that's up to the American people who say that they're Democrats in order to make that determination.
I want to get an audience question in here, and then we'll come back to this.
Answer a question about Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden when there are 13,000 women who have signed up and said they want to run for office since the November elections. That's who we should be talking about. We need to be recruiting them. We need to be training them. We need to be mentoring them. And this conversation, this narrative, I know this is exactly what y'all want to do because it's entertaining, but this is not what we're about right now. We need to go out to all of that energy that's out there and say, I'm in. And that's who we need to be talking about as Democrats.
Thank you. I want to get to another very important issue that happened in the 2016 election, and that is that the party got hacked by the Russian government. And on that, I want to bring in Nathan Smith, a DNC member from Kentucky, leaning towards supporting you, Secretary Perez, but still undecided.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. As a DNC committee chair, what are you going to do to protect the Democrats from hacking foreign countries in the future?
See, that's a really simple question because
Mr. Mayor, why don't you answer that question first?
As I'm pretty sure the only person.
One second, Mr. Ronan. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I'm pretty sure as an information warfare officer, I'm the only person up here who's had formal cybersecurity training. And I believe that there are two. Were you in information?
yes, I mean,
Okay.
we all do that kind of
I qualified in information warfare, including cyber, and what I learned is that there are two pillars to this. There's the system side, which has gotten a lot of the attention. There's also the human side. We've got to make sure that we're training ourselves because the weakest link is usually a person who can be fooled or tricked or has an issue with their permissions or their passwords. We've got to make sure we have a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy and not just think of it as IT, but I also just can't let that last question go unanswered because it is the kind of question we ask when we treat the presidency like it's the only office that matters. Our opponents on the Republican side have patiently and cleverly built majorities at the state house level, Congress. It's not just about the White House. And when we fail to recognize that, we get into a whole lot of trouble, even when we have the White House, having our policies obstructed and trapped. And if you wind up in a situation like we are right now, where we don't have it, that's when we're really left with
And
nothing.
Mr. Mayor, we're going to get to
My
that
response to
later in
Betsy
the
DeVos's
debate.
nomination was don't get mad, get on your
We're going to
school
get to
board.
that later in the
We need more
debate,
of
but I want to stay on hacking. Go ahead, Mr. Ronan.
All right. Sorry about interrupting your question. I jumped the gun. What I was talking about earlier was if we want to get rid of hacking or the risk of hacking, right, you take away the technology. Eventually in the future, that may very well be 10, 20, 30 years down the road. But for now, we have a solution. It's called universal voter engagement, like you were saying. It's also paper ballots, and it's also empowering the Postal Service to be the front and center of that. And it means we can hold those paper ballots for 4 years, like what we do in the military with maintenance. We keep records for decades. I've seen stuff from before I was even born. So we can do that with our voting as well. We can keep these records, so if there is any indication whatsoever of foul play, be it in the primaries or the presidential election, we have the
Thank
facts.
you, Mr. Ronan. Everybody, hold on. We have a lot more to discuss with the candidates who are here. They're running, of course, for the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Stay with us right after this break. Welcome back to the Democratic leadership debate in Atlanta. I want to start by bringing in Terry Anderson, a longtime activist and DNC member from Vermont. You are supporting Congressman Ellison. What is your question?
As you all know, in many rural parts of the country, we've been bleeding votes to the Republicans, not just in the last presidential election, but for several cycles now. Democrats aren't connecting well with rural voters. My question for you all is, why do you think that's happening, and what, as DNC chair, would you do about it?
Mr. Mayor, why don't you take that?
Well, thanks. Coming from Indiana, I know exactly what you mean. And yet we know it can be done. Not only in a city like mine have I been able to win, but also in rural areas near us. I was very proud to see a district right by us, right in Mike Pence's Indiana, where we were able to support Joe Taylor, got him elected in a Democrat state representative in a district that Trump won by 6. There are a few things that I think are important. First of all, you got to show up everywhere. Even in the counties where we're going to get beat for a long time, you still got to show up because it matters whether you get beat 80-20 or 60-40. That really adds up when you're talking about a whole district or a whole state. This is also the importance of the 50-state strategy that was dismantled largely in recent years. Everybody up here is saying that we've got to get back to a 50-state strategy. As the only candidate who was endorsed by the architect of that 50-state strategy, Howard Dean, I think I know how to get that done, especially because my state benefited from it. You know, we had, when I first ran statewide in 2010, 5 out of our 9 members of Congress were Democrats. Then we got decimated. Now we're down to 2. So I know what it means to compete and win in deep red territory. And the most important thing you have to do of all is talk to people about their lives, not the politicians and the politics.
Thank you. Secretary Perez, I want to show you, before I ask this question and our audience, the 2016 electoral map. Secretary Clinton failed to carry Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, states that would have delivered the White House to Democrats had she won. Now, President Trump rallied voters in those states by coming out against TPP and other free trade agreements. While you were Labor Secretary, you supported and defended TPP. So why would you be the right messenger to bring working class voters back to the Democratic Party?
Well, you know, I think implicit in that question is Tom's not a progressive. And you know what? I take a back seat to no one and what I accomplished at the Labor Department. We fought for increasing the minimum wage. We implemented an overtime rule. We attacked the issue of retirement security. I'm proud of the fact that the head of the AFL-CIO called me the best labor secretary since Francis Perkins. So I moved forward, and I was part of Team Obama, and I'm damn proud of being part of Team Obama. And when you're part of a team, you don't go to the buffet line and say, I'm going to play here or play there. And when we talked about the issue of trade, I was always talking about the American worker. And you know what? That's why I have the support of people from the labor movement. And we have to get back in rural America, because in Ohio, we weren't making house calls in rural America. That's precisely why we lost. I was in northwestern Wisconsin a couple weeks ago, and what I heard from one voter is, I feel politically homeless because you stopped showing up. And it wasn't simply that we were ignored, but we were disrespected. And so
Mr.
when
Secretary,
we have,
I just
when
want
we
to
have an every zip code
circle back to the initial
that's
question
what
on trade.
we can accomplish.
You said, quote, trade agreements like the TPP are critical to our 21st century competitiveness.
Yeah, I mean,
Do you stand by
Dana,
that now?
Dana, TPP is dead. It's been dead since, last August or September. So the issue is, how are we going to move forward in response to your map? And I think a big part of how we're going to move forward is we've got to tell our message of economic security. The work that I did, lifting wages, the work that we did, making sure when people work overtime, they get paid overtime. The work that we did in making sure that when you're saving for retirement, the advisor is looking out for your best interest. These are the issues that keep people up at night.
Thank you, Secretary Perez. Congressman Ellison, I want to get to another issue that's important to Democrats. Guys, I'm asking a question of Congressman Ellison. Thank you so much. Congressman, gun control. In 2014, you told Bill Maher that you wished the Democratic Party would come out against the Second Amendment. How do you reach out to Americans who support gun rights when you don't support the Second Amendment?
First of all, let me tell you, I remember that show very well, and that is not what I said at all. What I talked about is my grandfather's shotgun, the fact that I am a turkey hunter, and I didn't say that. That was not an accurate statement. But let me tell you, I go hunting with a friend of mine named Colin Peterson, who is a conservative Democrat in rural Minnesota, and he asked me to come speak to his 7th congressional district dinner. I'm there talking with rural voters about the things that matter to them. And you know what really does matter to them? Their jobs, their chance for a life for their kids, how trade has devastated their family. The fact is, people wake up in the morning hoping that the plant doesn't close all over this country, Indiana, Wisconsin, all over. And when they do close, people sometimes can get jobs again, but maybe at $10 an hour less. And it has really, really hurt this country. So, look, I am a believer in for people to be able to own guns. But the truth is that guns we do need background checks on guns. We do need to address the fact that people are getting murdered across this country, and none of these murders seem to bother the NRA.
Congressman, I just want to read you, since you said that wasn't what you said, I'll read you exactly what happened. Bill Maher, then why doesn't your party come out against the Second Amendment? It's the problem. Your response, I sure wish they would. I sure wish they would.
No, that was I wish you'd play the tape, because if you did, you would see that it did not go that way. But the real point is this. This country, absolutely I am for the right to bear arms, but I am not for these massive murders that happen all over this country every day. 27 kids killed in Sandy Hook, man. In my own district, a guy comes to his job and kills all of his co-workers. The owner of the business's son left homeless, left fatherless. I mean, we have a serious problem in this country around guns. And I think it is absolutely not, it's a false choice to say that you're going to ban the Second Amendment or we're going to have some common sense gun safety laws. I am for common sense gun safety laws. And
so much to use the right words when we're talking about these issues.
Well, it's also the right to not be taken out of context. I hope people will go back and look at the tape.
Mr. Mayor,
look, in my part of the country, this is one of the reasons people tune us out immediately. But there are ways of talking about this. I took some heat in my community. I'm from Indiana, and I support the Second Amendment. I spent Thanksgiving morning in a deer blind with my boyfriend's father. How's that for a 2017 sentence? But when I came out for universal background checks, I took some heat. But there are ways of talking about this, and again, it's making it personal. I talked about going to the funerals of people and consoling mothers of kids, teenagers that got shot in my city. I talked about the fact that I swear in police officers with their spouses at their side, praying that they're going to come home safe every day and wanting them not to be at an arms disadvantage with people in the street. And I talked about going outside the wire with a pistol on my hip and a rifle across my shoulder in a vehicle, knowing the difference between the kinds of weapons that belong on the streets of Kabul, Afghanistan, and the ones that belong on the west side of South Bend. When we talk about it in common sense terms, we don't lose people so quickly because these are common sense values and common sense ideals.
Thank
and
you.
on the issues, we win.
Congressman Ellison, would you like to respond?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's absolutely right that we connect with people where they are. And the part of the reality of the country we're living is that we wake up in the morning and hope that another mass murder doesn't happen. My colleague, Gabby Gifford, I remember the day that she got shot in the face. Congress didn't take any action after that. But I believe that people in rural America and around this country understand that that is a problem and that we don't want to take their guns away. This is a false narrative that the NRA is pushing. We just want to protect people in the communities they live in and preserve the right of hunters and home defense. All these things can exist together.
All right, thank you. These questions go to the issue of the perception of the party and how each of you would want to rebuild it. Ms. Boynton-Brown, let me bring you in on this. You said last month that your job is, quote, to shut other white people down when they try to say they are prejudiced. This was seized upon by critics of your party saying, see, they don't get it. She's shaming white people, and this is why they play identity politics, and this is why white people went for Trump. What do you say?
It's really unfortunate that the alt-right decides to take people out of context and have conversations of things that weren't said. I was having a specific conversation with the Democratic Party about how we really accomplish the goal of inclusiveness and making sure that we listen to each other. And that when we're having conversations with people who are trying to share their experiences, that we are present and we are not talking over the top of each other. For years, we have been an inclusive party, and it's time that we show with our actions that inclusivity is really what we're committed to. And that was the conversation that was being had. I want to go back to rural America because that's a really important topic. The reality is that we need to have people lifted up into the DNC leadership and strategy making that understand rural America, so that when we're going and we're having conversations, no matter what those conversations are, that we're having them in the right ways, because we need to communicate with rural America differently than how you run for president of the United States.
Ms. Boynton-Brown, thank you. Mr. Ronan, another group that you could describe the way Ms. Boynton-Brown is, people you need to speak to more and more directly as Democrats, would be millennials. You talk about this a lot. You say it was a grievous mistake to ignore the passions of millennial voters. How was that done? How is it remedied?
So, I mean, quite frankly, it goes back to what I said earlier with having the thumb on everybody else who would otherwise participate. And to go back on the Ohio and the losing by 80 to 20 or 60 to 40, it all comes together. We do not include people in the process. And that's the issue. We're focusing on attacking Trump, focusing on what the problems are in rural America. We're talking about guns. We're talking about this and that. But we're not addressing the issue, which is people don't have a voice in government. They simply don't. The process is difficult. The process is hidden. It's enclosed. We need to be more open. We need to be more transparent. It needs to be simpler. We need to get money out of politics. I mean, quite frankly, the biggest concern I have ran across among people, not just in social media, but I ran across in person, is they feel their voice is being drowned out by the almighty dollar. So how do you fix this? You get rid of money. You emphasize people actually coming to the table and actually having a chance to move forward and progress forward into running for office, just like during my own campaign. And I know I'm running out of time. I'd like to push just a little bit longer on it, though. When I ran for state representative, I went to my county chair and I asked them point blank, can you help me? And they said no. Then I went to the ODP and I asked them, can you help me? And they said, we will help the top 6 candidates. That's elitism, and that's not going to bring us back. That's not going to bring millennials back. It's not going to emphasize passion.
Thank you. Secretary. Secretary Perez, weigh on this.
I think there's a couple important dimensions of millennial engagement that I wanted to focus on. I think the first dimension is attitudinal, and this is about the culture change that needs to happen at the DNC. We all too frequently give a millennial a seat at the table, and we pat him on the head and say, you got your seat, now shut up. And we have to change that approach, because I'm a big believer diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. And we need to make sure that we are both engaging in diversity and inclusion. The second point is investment. because budgets are moral documents. If someone says an issue is important, I want to look at your budget. If the Democratic Party were to say millennial engagement is important, if you looked at our budget, it's not reflected.
All right, Mr. Secretary, thank you.
We do much worse.
Jamu Green and then Mr. Mayor. Jamu Green, please.
Well, as somebody who wrote the playbook on how you get young voters to turn out by increasing young voter turnout at Rock the Vote by 11%, I understand very clearly what needs to happen on this issue, and certainly budget reform to reflect that millennials are not the future of the party, they are the now of our party. And how we better engage with them is that we innovate how we operate as a party. We look at experimentation and disruption in ways that have not been welcomed into the party. And millennials can do that. So that's why I call for building innovation hubs at every single state party so that young people can come in and they can learn the concepts of experimentation. They can understand it's okay to fail up. But what also has to happen is we have to conduct business differently. We have to make our meetings less complex. We need to make our leadership opportunities easily accessible. We need to fully promote them. And then we also have to understand that there are some inclusive issues that we have as a party that need to be tackled. And we can do that by making sure that state parties do implicit bias training, making sure that they publish their staff and contracting diversity data.
Ms. Green,
These things are
Ms. Green,
important to millennials, and collaborative leadership
You're over time.
is where
Thank
we
you.
start.
Mr. Mayor, you're a millennial. What do you have to say about this?
Well, one thing you could do to better engage millennials would be to put a 35-year-old in as chair of the DNC. Look, I know how it feels. I'm in my 6th year as mayor of our city. I'd say we're pretty successful. I got reelected with 80% of the vote. But I'm still occasionally confused for one of my own interns. So I know what it feels like to be patted on the head and told you're the future. The best way to show that we are the present is to actually engage us at every level, including the level of leadership. Every important change in our country and in our history has been driven by young people. It's happening again right now. You know, the Women's March, for example, that wasn't driven by the party. It wasn't driven by politicians. It was multi-generational, and there were a lot of young people out there. They were energized, and they may or may not think of themselves as Democrats. As the only person that day, who as of that day was a candidate for DNC chair, who actually went to the Women's March, I can tell you that the energy there was extraordinary, and it speaks to what millennials want most, which is something you want to be part of, something positive. Yeah, we were showing what we were opposed to. We were showing the concern and the moral line in the sand, but there was something else to it, too. This is a season for happy warriors, and you could feel it there. And you can feel it in these other things that are rising up around the country. And the question for our party is, are we going to help lead it, or are we going to be racing to catch up?
Thank you, Mayor Buttigieg. I want to turn to the issue of rebuilding in the future, and specifically, I'm coming to you, Mr. Chairman, specifically state parties.
Yes.
You said that President Obama's political arm, Organizing for America, killed state parties.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
It killed state parties.
But how?
Listen. In 2006, Howard Dean started a 50-state strategy, and I know Governor Dean was the architect, but it was state party chairs that pushed Howard Dean in order to start that program. He started that program and invested in state parties, and as a result, we won in places that we never thought. I remember Rahm Emanuel and the Dean fights, talking about the money and all, but we won in places like Kansas, Nancy Borda. Well, in 2008, not only did we add to the majorities in the House and the Senate, we also added to that by winning the White House. And at that moment, when Barack Obama had his hand on that Bible, taking the oath of office, we had the majority in the House, the Senate, the White House. We had the majority in governorships, in secretaries of state, in attorneys general. We controlled both local and national. And what happened at that moment? OFA remained. The debt from President Obama's campaign went to the DNC, and the money that Howard Dean had placed into state parties decreased almost to zero. State parties in this country are broken. There are state parties in this country right now. In 2 years, have either they're defending one of the 25 U.S. Senate seats, or they have a governorship, or they're trying to win back their state house, and they barely have $35,000 cash on hand. You can't win if you don't have the capacity.
Thank you.
And that's why
Secretary Perez, you work for President Obama, obviously, and You work for President Obama, obviously in the official governing capacity. But what do you say to Chairman Harrison about the idea that he basically depleted the state parties? Do you agree with that? And if so, how are you going to fix it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with it. And I've said that a number of times. And the key is to go to school on it. And what we have to do is not only up our investments, but we've got to get back to the service culture. It's culture change. You know, there was a question before about cybersecurity. State parties can't afford to have a chief technology officer. The DNC has to do that job. When somebody is being, when you're recruiting candidates, the DNC ought to be helping to train them. When you are, when we're hiring organizers, the DNC should be training them. When Alaska flips and they become Democratic, or Kansas in a year when Trump wins by 14 points, they pick up 14 seats in their state legislature. We should have a Center for Best Practices so that we can go to school on what happened there and take those lessons. That's what we have to do. When we're building that infrastructure, when we're getting back to basics, when we're going to rural America and saying, we are here. And you know what? We stand for economic opportunity. We are the Democratic Party. That's how we turn it around. And it's got to be long-term investments. We are too short-term all too frequently.
Thank you. Congressman Ellison, I want to turn to something else, something that was talked about before the break, about what's going on in and around the country. And I want to look at another map. 6 states, only 6 states have Democratic governors and state legislatures. In the last 8 years, more than 900 seats in state legislatures went from Democrat to Republican. And it's mostly the legislatures that draw the congressional districts.
That's right.
And that's a big reason why Republicans have maintained control of the House of Representatives where you serve, sir. So what would you do so the Democrats are in a better position to redraw the map in and after 2020?
Well, let me tell you, redistricting has got to be one of the top priorities of the DNC from the very beginning. The DNC chairman needs to engage state parties and win state legislatures all over this country so that we can position ourselves to be ready for redistricting in 2020. But that means winning in 2018, and that means winning in 2017 in New Jersey and in Virginia. And I can tell you, it is a simple matter of turning on in the off year of campaigning everywhere. That's why in the 100-day plan that I am releasing tonight, I have a 100-day plan, I call for an immediate listening session right after the election on February 25th, where we'll ask DNC members to talk to Democrats all over the country and listen to them, to engage them, and then a summer canvass where we will knock doors all over this country, powered by volunteers, many of the people who are at the marches and at the rallies, and we will win state legislatures and focus on the down ballot races and the governors and the secretaries of state and state treasurers as well. We have got to win up and down the ballots from the dog catcher all the way up, and that is how we're going to be ready for
Congressman, thank you. Mr. Pekarsky, what would you do?
The reality here is that all of us are probably going to do the same thing if elected chair in terms of reforming the party and getting the party working again at a local level. We could regain seats all over this country. I was in Wyoming this last weekend listening to the Wyoming Democrats talk about what they're planning to do. They've got a very tough road to hoe there. It's a lot different than California or New York. But the real problem here is we've got a lot of problems with our election process. I happen to be an expert in the election process and the election system. And the real question which ought to get answered here, I mean, it's on my website. I think the voting members of the DNC know what's going to happen if I'm elected chair. The real question which the voting members of the DNC ought to have answered between now and the vote on Saturday morning is what do all of my learned and respected colleagues here intend to do to protect the voting process if they're elected chair? And that's about what I've got to say. Any one of us gets in, it's going to be the same thing in terms of re-energizing this party on a local basis. Whether it's called 50
Mr. Pekarsky, thank you. Everybody hold on. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more from the Democratic leadership debate.
All right, welcome back to the CNN debate. The race to be the chair of the Democratic Party. We got all 8 candidates here. Next question. Only one of you 8 have the distinction of having received a compliment from our president. And that is you, Congressman Ellison. The President Trump paid you the highest compliment. In fact, this morning, he said, one thing I'll say about Representative Keith Ellison in the fight to lead the DNC, he's the one who predicted early that I would win. Do you welcome the President's praise?
You know, I don't really welcome any praise from President Trump. It really pains me to say those two words. The fact that I can tell you this. I could tell by July 2015 that he had a lot of momentum and that he was gathering large crowds, and that when he got up there and talked about trade and TPP, NAFTA, when he got up there and talked about jobs, when he got up there and talked about infrastructure, even though he was bad on all those issues, he was gathering crowds and he was telling people what they wanted to hear. I believe that those are our issues. Fair trade is our issue. That's why the AFL-CIO endorsed me. That's why the steelworkers endorsed me. Leo Gerard, one of the people I really admired, said that in Baltimore, right after the disturbance with Freddie Gray, he said, let me tell you, that we used to have 30,000 steelworkers in Baltimore. Now we got 3. We have been hit hard by policies over the last 4 decades. Wages have stagnated. And the Democratic Party has got to be the party that is fighting for working people every single day. And we have always got to be on the side of the worker. We can never be found standing on the other side when working people are trying to make a living.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Mayor, let me bring you on this. You have economic issues, no question about that. You also have cultural ones. Earlier, just this evening, President Trump's administration withdrew the Obama-era guidance that allowed transgender students to use the bathroom of their choice in public schools. They say they're leaving it to the states. What is your response?
What kind of a person does that? What kind of a bully looks for the most vulnerable person you can find to attack? Look, when you're a transgender teenager, high school is a complicated and intimidating. In fact, when you're any teenager, high school is a complicated and intimidating place. And to make it harder on one of the most vulnerable parts of America's population, you know suicide rates for teenagers as a whole, and especially LGBT youth, went down after the marriage equality decision? This stuff really matters. And if your own leaders can't tell the difference between you and a predator, if that's what we're telling teenagers that they are, then we shouldn't be surprised that we're pushing them into having mental health issues. But this is part of a broader pattern of picking on vulnerable people. We had an immigration Know Your Rights event just a few days ago at a primary school on the west side of South Bend, where we had lawyers lined up to help inform people about their rights and how they could keep their families together. And I went to talk to those parents. And then I went into the school library to meet some kids from the high school. They were volunteering to hang out with the children who were there. And part of me was really inspired that they were doing that. But then part of me thought, is this what it's like in Donald Trump's America? That one of the things that your National Honor Society chapter in high school can volunteer on, you know, mine volunteered on stuff like trash pickup, that a category of thing you can volunteer on now as a high school student is to comfort and play with children while their terrified parents are in another room trying desperately to figure out how to keep their families together.
Right,
that's the kind of country we're living in? No, we've got a better way.
Thank you.
And that's why Democrats are the true party of families.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Boynton-Brown, the argument of the administration is essentially a 10th Amendment issue, that this is about returning power to the states. They decide their rules for education, and that's why they did this. It's not the federal government's place. Your response?
America's job is to protect all of its people. This is a protection issue. So there are obviously very legitimate reasons to return power to states. This isn't one of them. We have a responsibility, the federal government has a federal responsibility to make sure that all of our citizens' constitutional rights are protected and that they feel safe and that they have their needs met. And that is the bottom line, end of story. That is the American story. That's what we need to make sure that we're upholding. And that's what Democrats fight for every day.
Secretary Perez, I have a question for you. I have a question. I'll give you 30 seconds on this. Go ahead.
You know, we're going to train the new education secretary on what the IDEA is, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. We should also train them on other Title IV of the Civil Rights Act, because we use that in suburban Minneapolis, in Michelle Bachmann's Minneapolis, to address in Anoka Hennepin some horrific acts of bullying of kids who are LGBT. and we reached the first settlement of its kind. And the number of educators that called me and said, thank you. And they started wearing buttons so they could identify themselves as folks, if you wanted to come to me, this is a safe room. These are issues. Every child is entitled to a safe learning environment, and the Democratic Party has to continue to stand up for these fundamental rights.
All right, I have a question for you, Mr. Secretary. You heard Mayor Buttigieg earlier say that he was the only one of you who was at the women's marches, who had declared at that time. Mr. Pekarsky, you were there as well, but you weren't declared at the time.
I declared 2 days later.
All right, good. Good. Just to be clear about it, I saw your hand go up. I just wanted you to know I was ready for it. All right, so, Mr. Secretary, that doesn't sound good. Where were you on that day? You were at a donors summit in Florida. And it seems to present a contrast that this party has to deal with. They were on the ground marching. You were at a donors summit. It's a bad picture.
You know,
how do you defend it?
It was, Frank, and the first thing I said, we were all at the donor summit, the other candidates. And you know what? The first, I know, you pointed that out.
This is not good for Democrats.
I wasn't.
I mean, this
part of it.
you know, no, Chris, let's, I'm happy to talk about this. Because the first thing I said was, you know, this is a tone-deaf conference. Because I would rather, my first words down there, I'd rather be in Washington. But you know what? It was yet another debate, and it was ill-timed. And I had people in town, and I got back there, and we marched in Houston, and we marched elsewhere. I don't think you measure the commitment of an individual to inclusion and opportunity by one day. I think you measure it by the entire body of our work. And with all due respect, every single person on this dais has that commitment. There's no one person who has a monopoly on the high ground on these issues.
I want to add to that, because the reality is that the Democracy Alliance organizations that are in our states are part of what is hurting state parties right now. And it's a very important conversation. The OFA did not single-handedly kill state parties. McCain-Feingold was the start of the infrastructure crumbling of state parties. It was great for campaign finance reform. It was really bad for state parties. Citizens United really put the nail in the coffin for state parties. So as a community of progressive organizations, we have to come together. And that was the opportunity that we had to have that conversation.
Congressman Ellison, you said, I want to have this conversation.
I did, because...
And I just want to say, as you're saying that, just think about, I'm guessing, what it's like for somebody out there who's a grassroots organizer, particularly for this march.
Right.
To hear that most of you were at a donor summit, people who want to be the chair of the DNC.
Let me say this. People who are grassroots activists know that we've got to demonstrate and we've got to march, but we also have to do some of the background work to make sure we rebuild the party. And so when I say that, I really believe that people who were at the Women's March know that, look, you know, somebody needs to be trying to rebuild the Democratic Party. Somebody needs to be talking about how we restructure this party so we can win elections, because they know that as important as demonstrations are, and they are, and I was actually at that, later on that day, I was at a march in Miami-Dade standing with people protecting sanctuary cities. And so we were, I mean, look, we all go to marches all the time. This idea that, you know, one person went to one march one day and that's some big deal, it's not. The truth is we got to some people got to rebuild the party. Some people need to march. All of us need to create a new America where everybody's included.
Mr. Harrison.
Listen, I know the mayor likes to say that he's the only person. But listen, I'm the only person that is a party chair that is building a party right now on the stage, right? So let me tell you what I had to do that week, because I'm also a volunteer chair. I don't get paid to do this, but that is my life. That is what I do. So we had a forum on that Sunday. I took a red eye from that forum to get back to South Carolina for Affordable Care Act rally that Sunday. That next Monday, we had a Martin Luther King rally, our biggest rally in South Carolina, and we did that. That Friday, the day of the inauguration, I was going around the state of South Carolina, collecting blankets for the homeless, because we have a program called South Carolina Democrats Care, where we're actually in the communities addressing issues. And then on that Friday, Saturday, I left on an early flight, left my 2-year-old son, who's crying that daddy's leaving, in order to go to his rally, because many of the folks, a part of this job is party building. It is not just attending rallies, right?
It is party building. That means fundraising.
Hang on, guys. Mr. Mayor, since you made the point that you were the only declared candidate, why do you think that they were? Why do you, Mr. Mayor, since you had earlier pointed out that you were the only declared candidate at the time to attend the Women's March? What do you say to them when they say that, you know what, do they have a point that
sure. Look,
there's time to build the party and raise money and there's a time to march?
Everybody up here is busy. I get it. I'm busy running a city. I got 100,000 residents. I got $300 million budget, over 1,000 employees, and it's not like Pawnee. We don't have a city manager. Okay?
I'm sorry.
But we're also busy. I'm sorry, I'd like to finish my answer.
Now,
it's also not
can you wait a second? Wait your turn, please, and we'll come to you next. I promise. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
You know, of course we
Mr.
got to
Mayor.
raise money too. And I know how to raise money. I've done it for my campaigns. In a matter of weeks, I raised about $500,000 for my campaign for DNC chair. I get that. It matters. I didn't bring that up to get into a wrestling match about who's the better Democrat. We're all good Democrats. The point is it's about instincts. And when you're not a Washington insider, you have different instincts about where the energy in our party is coming from. I'm with the local. I'm with the grassroots. And I think we need a little bit more of that in the DNC before it becomes irrelevant.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
I don't know how many minutes we've spent on this question when we should be talking to the millions of people watching this, not just in this country, but millions of Americans around the world, about what we would do as DNC chair. And the women who organized that march around criminal justice reform, immigration reform, intersectionality, they do not care about a photo op. What they care about is, what are we going to do? Very specific prescriptions. So that's why I say we need to have a gender parity moonshot. We cannot live in the expectations of the past. We also need to set a voter turnout moonshot. Can we shift this conversation to what we would do
Ms. Green, and let's talk to a DNC member
and
who has a
the
question.
specific things the audience is looking for us to answer, because
you're out of time.
This tension is not good for the party.
Let's turn now to Megan Green, a DNC member from Missouri, undecided but leaning toward supporting Congressman Ellison. Go ahead.
Thank you. Historically, the Democratic Party has been the party of working people. However, with the influx of corporate money into the party, many have lost confidence that the Democratic Party really can represent everyday people. As chair, how do you help to ensure that the Democratic Party, once again, is that party of working people?
Secretary Perez.
That one, please.
Secretary Perez, go ahead.
Sure.
Chance to speak.
That's a great question. And I think we have to do a number of things. Like in my own campaign for DNC chair, I decided not to take any money from lobbyists or corporations. Now, having said that, we have to have this conversation as a DNC on whether to do something similar. And as we do that, we want to articulate the value proposition in your question, which is we want to make sure we're not in fact or in perception in the pocket of someone. But at the same time, we need to understand the doctrine of intended and unintended consequences. Because I have a friend who couldn't work in the Obama administration for 2 years because he was a lobbyist with one client, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. I have other friends in the union movement who are lobbyists. So we're going to say we're going to take no money from unions. I have other friends who used to be lobbyists, and they deregistered, and now they're public policy specialists, and they're doing lobbying. It quacks like a duck, it acts like a duck. So these are very important questions because we have a size 12 need, and we need to work to build on the small dollar world while asking and answering these questions that you asked.
Thank you. So, I mean, the question is quite simple. Perception is everything. And the other part of the perception is this divisiveness. We started off this debate talking about how we're going to fight Trump. Well, yeah, we're going to fight Trump, but we're also going to go down the line with Pence and keep Steve Bannon from doing all his stuff too. But the other thing is, especially with rural America, we have pushed so many people out of the party deliberately over the course of many, many years over divisive issues like gun control, just to name a few, or one, I should say. The issue is we need to bring everyone back together. That's why in Baltimore I talked about the New Deal, because when we were the party of FDR and we had something to fight for, to build together upon, we were the greatest nation on earth. We had the strongest middle class. We were growing for decades, and then we got into bed with big business. And look at where we are today.
Thank you. Mr. Pekarsky.
On the issue of what we ought to be doing here.
One second, Mr. Pekarsky has the floor.
on the issue of what we ought to be doing here, again, my view of it is that we have got to energize the party locally and find out what is happening on a local basis. In terms of, if you want to talk about fundraising, I think there are other ways to raise funds other than getting from sources who might have some political control over what the party's doing. There are ways to raise it in small amounts. But the critical issue here is what everybody is going to do to protect the electoral process. And that is the question which the DNC members ought to get answered by everybody here between now and the vote on Saturday morning.
But that wasn't the question that was asked by our guest, and I just would like to address it because I was the first candidate on stage to actually support Christine Pelosi's resolution that's going to be before the entire DNC. So all of the DNC members get to have this conversation, and I think it's a valuable conversation that we're having exactly because of the Citizens United issue that's facing our country right now. We have to get the money out of politics so that we have elected officials who actually reflect our people. And the party's got to take a stand on that.
Thank you. I want to talk about something that has brought some intrigue to this race, and that is a dinner between you, Congressman Ellison, and you, Secretary Perez. You went out to dinner recently. What happened there?
This is my buddy right here.
Did you cut a deal?
Let me just say
Did you cut a deal?
We cut no deal, but what we did say is that unity for this party is so essential. If I win, I can count on Tom, and if Tom wins, Tom can count on me, and that goes for everybody up here. Exactly. And so we had that conversation, and let me just tell you, and I think the DNC members want us to be friends. They want us to talk to each other. They want us to work it out. And I'm still, and I just want to say, and that's why I'm really proud to have the support of Chairman Ray Buckley, who's the chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, who's done a great job. Because we should work together. We need to be a team, everybody. And now to kick it to Tom.
Secretary, who paid? Who paid?
I did.
He paid.
But you know what?
He made me pay that, Chris. I tried to. We fought over the check.
Chris, the reality is I have traveled to Keith's district multiple times as labor secretary.
That's right.
Because we were working on the same things. We were working on lifting wages. We were working on paid leave. We were working on upskilling people. And you know what? Here's the reality. And here is, I think, the most important principle that we need to understand is a unified Democratic Party is not only our best hope, it's Donald Trump's worst nightmare. And that's why we were together.
Mayor Buttigieg, hold on a second. Mr. Ronan, hold on a second. And maybe this will address what your point's going to be. Mr. Buttigieg, why we bring this up is because, yes, you're rebuilding your party. You're trying to figure out how to do it. The metaphor of the dinner was that, well, who had a seat at that table? Yeah. That's why it drew intrigue. And I'm sure all of you would have liked to have been at dinner together talking about what it was. Is it important that the Democratic Party, in rebuilding with whoever the new chair is, recognizes that there is a sense there that it hasn't been equal playing field for everybody in the party?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we have got to resume the mantle of being the party of fairness. We always were. And then that theme got stolen from us by Donald Trump. See, when he was out there saying that the system is rigged, instead of us saying it is, but you're part of the problem, we got a better way, we started to sound like the party saying the system is perfectly fine. And that wasn't convincing, because it isn't true. Our political systems, our economic systems, they're not perfectly fine. Now, what is perfectly fine is for good Democrats to get together over a meal. That's a good thing. But I do have a suggestion, which is that the next time the secretary and the congressman want to get a cheeseburger, come do it in South Bend. Because I'm from an industrial community, which I'll buy, too.
Okay, all right.
That seems to be the hook for Congressman Ellison.
Look, this is important because when you're from a community like that was brought to its knees by factory closures in the 60s and 70s, but found a way back. And suddenly you find your own hometown being studied with exotic fascination by political commentators on the coasts. I think people would have a little bit to learn. Trump voters are not a mystery to me. There are a lot of people in my city, my county, which went 50-50 last time, who voted for Barack Obama, and then they voted for Obama again, And then they voted for Trump. And by the way, they also voted for Pence and they voted for me. We've got to understand what's on their
All right,
minds
thank
and
you,
take them
Mr. Mayor.
seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have more to talk about. We're going to be right back from Atlanta with the Democratic leadership debate. Stay with us.
We are live in Atlanta with a debate with the Democratic candidates to be DNC chair. And I want to ask each of you the same question. You'll have 30 seconds to answer. And the question is this: why should you be DNC chair? Peter Pekarsky, I'll start with you.
I should be DNC chair because I will reform the party. I understand the technology involved and have a technical background. I understand the election system, the fact that many people in this country have doubts about the accuracy of our election system. I will reform that system. That is the election system, so people are assured that they are having honest elections. And the key to that is re-energizing the party, as I intend to do on a local basis.
Thank you. Mr. Ronan.
So why should I be the DNC chair? You know, when I look at why I'm even here today, I was active duty 4 years ago. I had a perfectly good career, I had a perfectly good life. But what I saw was a lack of commitment, a lack of spine, a lack of courage from our political leaders that was culminated by the 2013 government shutdown. So for me, it's not about the job. It's not about being the next manager or administrator, having the hero's answers to every question. It's about truly re-engaging that which has been lost. The American people, their voice, and bringing us all back together as one big happy family. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Boynton-Brown.
I think it's so important that the women, the young women, especially in our country, understand that they can do anything, that they don't have to wait for permission, and that they don't have to check boxes if you want to step up and lead because you have vision, that you can do it. I'm excited to be the next DNC chair because I want to make the DNC a service-based organization for the 21st century that's innovative and resilient and responds to the new power culture that's happening in our country and gives the power back to the people of our country.
Thank you. Jamu Green.
This is a transformative moment for our country and certainly for our party. And in this moment, we need someone at the DNC who is going to be able to increase turnout. I've done that as president of Rock the Vote. We need someone who is going to be able to go into communities that we've disconnected from and communicate more effectively to them. I've done that at Fox News for almost the last 7 years. We need someone who is going to be able to innovate how we operate as a party. And I've done that using voter registration, technology, moving it online. And if we really are going to tap into this moment, we also have to understand that politics as usual is not going to cut it. We need a fierce leader who is not afraid of speaking uncomfortable truths, even when it's not the way to get the most amount of votes in this election. And I think I'm the only candidate up here who has turned to the DNC and said, if we stand shoulder to shoulder and handle these truths, we will be stronger as a party for it.
Thank you. Jamie Harrison.
So the DNC chair role and responsibility is a job. A job has responsibilities. And that chief job is party building, party building. The next chair needs to be a builder, someone who has the experience of building a party. I've done that in South Carolina. That's what we're still doing. Someone who's an organizer, not just organizing rallies, but organizing the diversity within our party. That is our greatest strength, but also comes with great challenges. Someone who's a visionary, someone who's thinking not just the next election cycle, but down the road, 2, 3, 4, 10 years from now. Who do we want in our party and why do we want them there? And last but not least, the person has to be a fighter. Not just fighting against Donald Trump, because we will all do that, but someone who has been fighting their entire life. I started behind the starting line with a young mom who worked so much, and my mom, thank you so much for being here tonight. But I know what poverty looks like, and I will be probably the only chair that's ever been on food stamps, the only chair that has not only lost their home once, but twice, the only chair that knows what the hardships that working people in this country have to go through. And that's what we need in our next chair, someone who knows the experiences of the working people.
Thank you. Mayor Buttigieg.
If you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. This is a test of whether the DNC is ready for change. I'm running for chair because I'm living what everybody's talking about. If we say we want to understand state and local, put in a mayor who works at the local level every day in government and party building. If we're saying a new generation, have a new generation of leader. If we're saying that we recognize that the solutions are not going to come from inside Washington, Pick somebody who doesn't get up in the morning and go to an office in Washington every day. This is our future. Our future is on the line. I know how to do this. I've helped turn around a city. Now it's time to turn around our party, and I'm the right person to do that job.
Thank you. Congressman Ellison.
You know, Dana, I'm the right person to be the next chair of the DNC because I have a burning conviction that the Democratic Party has to stand for the working people of this country. The workers, the farmers, the small business people need a party fighting for them, all colors, all cultures, all faiths, all background. We need a party that fights for us. And you know what? The DNC chair has to win elections. That's the job, actually. And on this stage, I think I've won more elections than anyone. I've actually stood for election 13 times and won all those times. But I've also made sure that my governor is a Democrat, my Secretary of State, both senators, every up and down the line, we have Democrats statewide in Minnesota because I've spiked the vote. And look, I've raised the money. I've raised over $1 million to my state party and gotten over 33,000 separate contributions. That's why I should be the DNC chair.
Thank you, Secretary Perez.
We need a leader who can take the fight to Donald Trump. We need a leader who can communicate our optimistic vision of hope and inclusion. When hope's on the ballot, we win. When fear is allowed to be on the ballot, we lose. We need someone who understands local government, where I work, who understands the intersection of all of these parts. We need someone who is a turnaround specialist, because this organization has a crisis of confidence and a crisis of relevance, and it requires someone with experience as a turnaround agent at scale. That's what I've done in my jobs before. That's the passion I bring to the jobs. I've fought the good fights, and we've won a lot of them, and we need to take this fight and move forward, and that's why I believe that I am the best qualified candidate.
Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for joining us as candidates tonight. Thanks to all the people behind us and all the people at home for watching our debate.
And be sure to watch CNN this weekend to learn who will be the next chair of the DNC. That's going to happen on Saturday. CNN Tonight starts right after this quick break.